Welcome to Hail the Queen, a podcast about authenticity, happiness, and pursuing your dreams. My name is Raina Spasova Van Houst, and I am the host of Hail the Queen. I'm also a writer and a habit coach, and I love working with people who identify as women, people who have dreams and aspirations and want a balanced life. My guest today is Megan deBoer. Megan is the founder of Tended Wealth, a business that helps individuals heal their emotional and practical relationship to money. As a certified financial recovery counselor, her approach considers the context of our current financial circumstance, so our lived experience, our family of origin, and the broad culture that together shape our beliefs about money. Megan is passionate about transforming this fundamental part of our lives from shame and overwhelm to a sense of agency, clarity, and potential. She specializes in helping those who are self employed to radically increase their earning. Megan scores participants and one-on-one clients regularly attest to the life-changing power of this work. Megan and I talked, of course, about money, about our relationship with money, about healing our relationship with money, and we talked about shame. We talked about money trauma. We talked about under earning, the difference between money and wealth. We talked about noble poverty. We talked about abundance. And we finished with some practical tips from Megan on how to gently start healing our relationship with money. So I hope you stay till the end. I'm more than sure you're going to enjoy this conversation. So now I leave you with the best part of this episode, my actual conversation with Megan deBoer. Enjoy. Welcome to a new episode of Hail the Queen. And today I have Megan. Actually, how do you pronounce your last name? Because I'm based in the Netherlands, so I have my
Mm,
Dutch pronunciation. What would be the
yeah,
English pronunciation of your last
yeah.
name?
So it's deBoer, and it is Dutch. So I'm not sure how you pronounce it there, but yes, it's
Very,
deBoer.
very close to that. The Boer. Yeah. Okay. So, welcome to Megan deBoer and the Boer. And the more important part, of course, of the conversation is not your last name, it's what you do and the reason why you're here. And I love asking my guests to introduce themselves because I'm always curious to hear how my guests introduce themselves. I'm just curious of that. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And so I am a financial wellness coach and the founder of Tended Wealth. And the what do I do is really supporting people in their process of healing their emotional relationship with money, and supporting them in the practical application of taking care of their money, taking care of their wealth. And my specialty really is at the intersection of those who are self-employed, so really helping people with earning and um, the intersection between their business and what they need to earn to support their lifestyle and their business. And I work with a lot of heart centered entrepreneurs and artists and creatives. And um, it tends to be an area where there can be a lot of conflict about money and what it means in our lives and value and worth and there just tends to be a lot that comes up around money. It tends to be a very conflicted area of our lives, and my role is to really help facilitate a different relationship with money.
and well, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because you're not that much focused on the how-to part of dealing with money, although you do mention that you combine the practical and emotional part. But what really stood out to me, and I'm always drawn to you, is that you also focus on the emotional aspect of, or actually, as you called it, the relationship with money. And by the way, I just want to say that I always thought that your website is called Tender Wealth, although I've been on your website so often. It's just now that you mentioned it's Tended Wealth. Um,
Yes.
just interesting thing. But let's talk about the emotional part of in the relation in our relationship with money. The other thing that I'm always very curious about is how did you end up doing what you do now? Because as I was on your about page, I saw that you actually graduated as what was it? Comparative history,
Yes,
which has nothing to do with
I
money.
know.
Then you went through being a bookkeeper. What was that journey like?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And um, you know, it's an excellent question, and I feel like my path. I have this sort of dual, very very distinct yet integrated parts of my mind and just how I operate in the world. So I have a very emotional side of myself, and then a very analytical side of myself. And my academic history, or my academic background, was studying. It was my major was called comparative history of ideas, and really, it was kind of philosophy and religion and anthropology and literature, and really, if I could boil it down to one one a couple of words, it would be really studying the human experience, and that was sort of in an academic context the only place that I could really dive into all the questions that I had. What drives us? What makes us struggle and suffer, and what makes us come alive? Those were all of the questions, and what are the political forces that are involved? So those big questions have always been really present for me personally, and yet I had really no clear path of what that would translate into in a working environment. I didn't want to go into academia. I didn't want a lot of those traditional paths, and I found a lot of satisfaction in bookkeeping and accounting, and had always had an aptitude there, and it was very satisfying, and it is still very satisfying to me to work with numbers. And so that just became the space that where I was paid to do work. And I actually worked at a yoga center right after college. I was the business manager in the yoga center doing the bookkeeping. And then after I had my children, I stepped back into bookkeeping, and I took on about 20 small business accounts, and I would just rotate through the month with all of my different bookkeeping clients. And it was in that process that I really witnessed I had a very intimate lens with people who are self-employed and their struggles with money, how they would avoid looking at their money completely. They would fantasize about sort of making it big, but be in debt or not paying themselves. So I was witnessing all of these patterns and wanting to understand what was driving those patterns, even if I was suggesting different strategies. And there was a point where I sort of crossed over from being a bookkeeper and really started wearing more of a business coach hat, even though I didn't have the language for it at the time, but I could see things really clearly, as one who has the privilege of being outside of the outside of, in your own head, you have the luxury of being able to witness and shed light on the different aspects of someone's business that are not working, clearly not working. And so it was in that process of inquiry that I came across my mentor, Karen McCall, and the Financial Recovery Institute. And it was an immediate, intuitive, and just a clear knowing, oh, this is the piece that I have been missing. This is the piece that sort of clicks everything into place. And it was understanding the patterns of under earning and the patterns that I also knew were true for myself as well. And that took me on the path of this, embarking on the certification and starting to do this work myself. And in the process, really addressing some chronic patterns that I had around earning and around wealth and money in general, my own relationship with money. So that's a long answer, but that's really what has brought me here.
And as I'm listening to you, what comes to my mind is that because you work exclusively, I guess is the word, with solopreneurs. And from my own experience, personal experience, but also as a coach working with solopreneurs, I noticed that when you own your business, one of the things that could easily happen is that you don't separate your business from
Hey,
yourself.
yes, yes,
And then what also happens, again, personal experience also from myself, but working with other people as well, is that I guess then it's also very easy to see the relationship we have with money as the relationship I have with money as a person, as an individual, and I bring that into
yes.
my finances, financial relationship. Oh, that got very complicated,
Oh
but
no, I know exactly what you're saying. Just that there, because there isn't the boundaried separation between yourself as a solopreneur and your business, or it's harder to separate, or it's very common for them to be enmeshed and intertwined. Sometimes even the actual accounts, the actual bank accounts, that it's very easy for that line, for there not to be a line, and for that your own relationship with money to then cross over into your business, and for your own relationship with money to sort of contaminate the business, for lack of a better word, sort of a negative connotation. But it happens, and it's where the drama with money, where we project our fears and our fantasies and our unresolved, money trauma, we will continue to play out that drama in our business. And there's just, when we own our own business and when we are responsible for earning our income, it's very different from receiving a paycheck, where you negotiate your salary one time or once a year. It's when you're self-employed, you are having that conversation, you are confronting that conversation on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. So it can be very confronting, and it's where there's so much, so much behind closed doors, and so much that is secret and shameful about that part of a business owner's life not being neat and tidy and all buttoned up. And there's this, front facing, how you are showing up in the world, how you are presenting yourself as a business owner, as successful. And then there can be this very shadow side that's filled with a lot of shame. And it's tragic to me, because I know that piece is often holding people back. It's where imposter syndrome can kind of sneak in and feel like, oh God, if anyone saw, if anyone knew what is really going on, that I'm in a lot of debt, or that I don't save enough for my taxes, or I'm not really paying myself as much as I need to, or I'm really not actually keeping the money that I claim to be making. My business actually costs so much to run that I'm actually not profitable. So to me, I just feel so passionate, especially for those who are in service, supporting other people, that the money piece, that we give a little space, that we normalize that this is hard, this is really challenging territory, and it's where you're confronted with so much stuff right out of the gate when you work for yourself, and to normalize that struggle, to bring that struggle out into the open as much as one is comfortable, even if that's just listening to this podcast and knowing that you're not alone in that struggle, and really kind of giving some space to the this part of the journey, this part of the entrepreneurial journey that can be so challenging for a lot of people. Not everybody, but it does confront people along the way. And sometimes it's like a business owner who's been in business for 3 or 4 years, and they are very successful and they're brilliant at what they do, and it's just this piece that hasn't been fully resolved, and that's where I just love supporting love supporting my clients in that part, so that they can really open up and not be held back, by whether it's shame or just disorganization, or you know limiting beliefs around what their earning potential actually is. Sometimes people are holding back their rates or holding back an offer because there's this disconnect, because there's um, an unresolved piece.
As I'm listening to you, what I'm realizing is that the moment I became an entrepreneur, so I started my own business, I didn't even realize, but that was the moment that I felt that there was this magnifying glass on my life. Because once I started working for myself, to say it differently, I find it so much easier to work for someone else, to be in a company, be it a corporate or not, because then I'm not in the spotlight. But the moment I started my own company, my first business, and that's when like everything, and
Yeah.
not by someone else, by
Hmm.
myself, because
By yourself. Yes. 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 And there's no hiding anymore. Like, you can't hide anything from yourself. So yes, it is um, choosing to confront those things yourself. Yes.
and I am really doing my best to keep the focus on money, but at the same time, my relationship, my money is something that I started working on this year. So I noticed that I feel way more comfortable to talk about business more in general rather than money. So let me try to come back to money.
Okay.
So I hear you mention a lot about talk a lot about shame. Um, Shame and money, and as silly as this may sound, it was about a year ago I was confronted with this question. I actually don't know how shame feels like, so I had to Google that. Back then I learned a lot about shame. I noticed that shame can be even that feeling of feeling uncomfortable, that could also be shame. So can you say it for dummies like me? Money and shame, what does that look like? What does that feel like?
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, that's such a good question, and um, I love that you looked it up and you had to sort of step into what does this what is this experience of shame. And I would say, shame is how we are how we are perceived and judged. It's always coming from the external. It doesn't arise like it we feel it internally, but it's because of how we are perceived by someone else. So it's really the exposure. So, for instance, if and this can, I'll just ground it in some very specific examples of in the financial. So it could be people, you're out to dinner with your girlfriends, other business owners, and people start talking about um, going on vacation, going on a 2 week holiday, a 2 week vacation. And everyone starts talking about hotels and where they're going to fly to, and it feels sort of extravagant, and yet that you cannot afford to go. Your credit cards are maxed out. You don't have any savings to rely on. You know that is not possible for you. And so, even though no one is technically shaming you, you feel your own shame because of the fear of anyone finding that out. You feel it kind of rising, and it becomes, your heart rate might increase, your cheeks might feel a little flushed, you might start fidgeting a little bit or want to walk away, like do something else. You might pick up your phone and be distracted. The shame triggers kind of its own, it's related to a trauma response. And so you may have that fight or flight kind of response, or you may freeze, you may sort of shut down and collapse. So shame looks different for everyone, and it's really helpful to kind of tap into even just noticing and observing what kind of like what physiologic response tends to come up for you, whether it's flushed cheeks or heart racing or collapsing or fidgeting or kind of wanting to stand up, and like all of a sudden you like it can also happen just listening to someone on a podcast talking about how much they have in investments, and you get really uncomfortable. Like you may not even be conscious that that's what you're getting uncomfortable about, but all of a sudden you are in the kitchen trying to find a snack and you're sort of distracting yourself. And it's a way to get away from the discomfort of the acknowledgement of where you are in relation to this expectation, this external expectation of where you should be, what you should be doing. And so that's where it's felt in the internal realm, but it's usually triggered in the external realm, even if that's the perception of someone of being exposed to in the external. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I hear you also mention a lot trauma when it comes to money. Um, to be honest, a couple of months ago, I wouldn't have connected these two words together. But again, also a couple of months ago, I wouldn't have thought that people with a lot of money can also have trauma around money. So, can you expand a little bit more on the subject of trauma and money? And then I'll throw in my second question, at which I
Yes.
already hinted. But
Yeah. Yes. So I just want to first frame it as, trauma is, I think, to me, the most important is to recognize that there can be acute traumatic experiences, and then there can be um, repeated smaller, sort of little t trauma experiences that over time, unrepaired, can create the same experience in your body physiologically as a bigger trauma response. So I just want to frame that first, that the idea of trauma, it's really in that repeated form, and it's also in the acute form. And I never want to minimize acute trauma whenever I'm talking about it. But what is crucial for me to convey, especially with money trauma, is it is, and with all trauma, but particularly money trauma, it is when there has been a rupture and no repair. So there's sort of a skip in the record, or that there's an experience that hasn't had resolution. And in money specifically, that can be like money trauma can be from poverty or periods of poverty, um, where there is a very visceral experience of not having enough to eat, not having enough, like really living hand to mouth, only having a couple of dollars in your checking account, and living in that state of actual fear, physiologic, your safety is at risk. You are in that heightened alert state, and prolonged, that becomes money trauma. It can be in one instance, it can be over time. And different people are sensitive to it in different ways. So for some people, they may be able to ride over that and it not affect them long term. And other people sort of get stuck in that. Again, if it hasn't been repaired, if there hasn't been sort of making sense of that time period. So if it happened in childhood, not being able to make sense of it, having that, sort of pre-conscious fear where they are terrified of not having money. That can be one way that money trauma shows up and is sort of buried underneath at a very unconscious level. And money trauma can also be, you were working and really successful at a six-figure job, and then you were fired unexpectedly. You were let go, and everything just disappeared overnight. And again, unresolved, there can be what I would, depending on the person, the individual's experience, there could be some money trauma that needs to be healed there, around earning, around worthiness, around, it's sort of all connected. It's probably multi-layered, but the money piece is going to be around earning and security and fear, and the support that either was there or not there at that time.
And you gave examples of the bigger, the acute trauma. Can you also give a couple of examples of what you mentioned, the smaller repeated instances of trauma? Because somehow when I think of trauma, the thing that usually comes to my mind is the big thing, and I do appreciate you mentioning that. Um, but I recognize that there are also instances, not only with money, but again, coming back to money, staying on the
Mm-hmm.
subject of money, it's usually that those repeated instances that we don't really see as trauma, but they have that effect on us. So if you can give a couple of examples.
Yes. So these are these I would say are it really depends on the individual. This is not going to necessarily be for everyone, but I would say that those who are highly sensitive and highly attuned in a relational way, if they are, let's say they are a solopreneur, or they're self-employed and they're a service-based business owner, and they are working with a client who sort of repeatedly questions the value of what they are receiving from their work. They're maybe not, maybe they're balking about whatever they're supposed to pay for the service. And they're kind of constantly undercutting or saying, like, gosh, this is so expensive. Or, they're making comments like that, where there's that crossover between a person's value, or the interpretation is the person's, like, I am not valuable. Like, that's the message that is being communicated in that instance. And if that is happening repeatedly, then there could be like bracing and defensiveness that comes up for that solopreneur whenever they are in that conversation around money and their rates, and where they are starting to be defensive, like they're not stating their actual rate. They are all of a sudden out of their mouths comes a lower rate than they just decided that they were going to be charging. Their rate from 2 years ago. This has happened. I've seen my clients do it, or heard of it happening. And that is a trauma response from that repeated. And I would say it's this is where money trauma can be so interesting, because that's where it sort of shows up. But of course, it has much deeper roots, and in someone's history, in their own interpersonal relationships, and it's being expressed in this very specific way with earning in self-employment. Um, so it becomes trauma, like it becomes money trauma, but sometimes the origin is a little bit deeper than that.
So interesting. It's very fascinating. Earlier, you also mentioned under earning. And well, actually, the example you just gave is of when asked about your fee, instead of saying an X amount, you say half of it, um, because of money trauma. And that was one of the fascinating things I learned about money. It was actually through a book that I found as a recommendation on your website. Which one was that? The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist, I believe. And that was the first time in my life that I recognized that people with money can also be under earners. They can also have a very traumatized relationship with money. So, how is your approach different to people who struggle making money, and to people who already make an X amount of money, say six figures?
That's an excellent question, and it really it's so interesting how it shows up in a different way, and what you're speaking to is so important, because when we think of the term under earning, we think of low earning, when it actually can span a pretty wide range of earning. It's not always an indication, it's never an indication of how hard someone is working or not working. So, first, I just want to dispel that myth. And it rarely is, it's sort of more obvious at the lower earning, in the lower earning range. But it is always, there's always the potential for it to be present in the higher earning tiers as well. And in terms of how I address that with clients, for me, it is the expression of it is always, while the expression is different, sort of the root of it is the, or the common denominator is that someone is not really honoring their own needs and their own worth. And needs is I like to really look at a lens, look through the lens of that need in a really holistic way. So the need is, are you supporting yourself? Are you sustaining yourself? Do you have adequate savings in reserve now and for the future? Do you, are you protecting yourself from any debt now or in the future? Um, that is all part of the lens that I look through to make sure someone is actually meeting their needs. But beyond that, it is looking at soul needs, looking at practical needs, looking at, is someone able to really, they may be making six figures, but they may not have any time at all to enjoy their lives. They're sleep deprived, they're exhausted, they're burnt out. They may also have it expressed in money, but that under earning piece, it can be showing up there. That the deprivation can be showing up in lifestyle in addition to money. So I'll just keep it focused on money, but it can express in a lot of different ways. And years ago, I actually started really reframing under earning for myself and with my clients as under receiving, because it really isn't limited just to money. It really sort of spans a much wider spectrum, receiving support, receiving, like, really giving yourself time off, really allowing yourself to enjoy the money that you do have. That can be a really interesting area, especially in the higher tiers and with people who have a lot of wealth, where there's a discomfort having wealth and kind of like an impulse to get rid of it very quickly, to not hold it, to not allow it in their lives, to not enjoy it. So that can be an expression of, it's a little bit different than under earning, but it's an expression at that higher income level of not not allowing that, like the fullness of wealth into your life.
Well, in preparation for this conversation, no, wait, let me take a step back. Earlier this week, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she mentioned something about money and wealth, um, which was something I hadn't heard before. Money screams and wealth whispers. So I have two, and when I heard that, I immediately thought of you because my conversation was on Monday, and I knew I was talking to you today, Friday. So my first question is: do you agree with that statement? Money screams and wealth whispers.
That's beautiful. I haven't heard that before, actually, and it just immediately resonates with me and what I feel. The truth that resonates there is the money being this sort of transient, unstable, unpredictable, this chase and sort of having to have and having to get, money, this sort of transactional and relentless, that scream uh, that's coupled with money in that phrase. It just holds that urgency and that desperation that I think so many people feel with money. And wealth is stable and slow and spacious inherently. And so coupling it with that whisper is like, it's not demanding as much attention. It's quiet. It's there in sort of in a subtle way, not in that um, loud and demanding way. So yeah, that's what immediately um, comes to mind, and I'm curious to hear if you what you thought, other than just bringing it up in this conversation, how it resonated for you.
My first reaction was that I felt a very deep connection to those words, and it gave me a lot of peace and comfort, recognizing that wealth whispers, especially because me, myself, and because I am a quieter person. I wouldn't necessarily say introverted, but I'm a sensitive person. I like observing, I like listening. I don't like that tendency, which is very promoted these days. I guess these days, I'm not sure, of always having to say something, which again, tying it to money, I think is something that I feel is very often promoted as the way of running a business, of having a business, screaming on social media, screaming about what you do, who you are. It seems like you want to add something to
Yeah,
that.
well, the only thing I mean, I think you're, yeah, I just appreciate you sharing that, and I think this is the piece that it's really the reason that I named my business Tended Wealth, is that I really wanted to um, broaden the definition of wealth and really reclaim it from that sort of the wealthy, and really come bring it back down and have it sort of encompass all the different aspects of our lives, our relationships, our health, yes, our money. And so to me, that just letting that letting that phrase just sit with me, it's like it's sort of bringing money, like reshaping that perception of money, from that projected experience of money, letting money be a part of our wealth, and be in that quieter realm, that supportive, quieter realm that it wants to be in. And I really believe that, like, money is really there to partner with us and to be there, to help support our lives. And this is where, when we're in a frustrated relationship with money or a shamed relationship with money, we don't, where it hasn't had resolution, we're in conflict. We're in conflict with money. It can't partner with us. It wants to, and we're sort of fighting with it, turning our backs to it, or judging it, or shaming it, or rejecting it, in subtle and not so subtle ways, rejecting it. So coming into relationship with money is the path to coming into relationship with wealth and having it be that quieter whisper rather than the scream.
As I'm listening to what you're saying, and I've been looking at my notes and I really cannot find that, but there was that beautiful thing you said on your website. It was about, you have to help me here. It was about that having less is morally better.
Yes. Yes.
And so I would appreciate if you can say that in a
Yes. Yes.
better and clearer way than me.
Yes.
But my question is, and I'm not sure there's really a question here, but as I'm listening to you, what I recognize is how, for instance, I noticed that I can speak only for myself. There is that preference to say affluent, no, abundant. That's the word, abundant. But abundant is not necessarily wealthy. And again, I'm not sure there is a question here. It's just these things came to me as I was listening to you. How how I use abundant, how I notice other people use abundant, but at the same time, I'm not sure that these people have what's the opposite of conflicted relationship with money?
Harmonious.
Harmonious. So I'm just rambling here, and I would
Yes, yes, yes.
leave it
Yes,
over to
yes.
you.
No, I can, I know exactly the nuance that you're speaking to. And so that sort of the moral superiority of not wanting or needing money, I think, is what the language that I
Yes,
used on my
yes.
website. And another term that is often used that I think is really helpful is noble poverty, which is like that same belief that it's sort of morally superior to not have. And this is where, again, culturally, at least in the US, we have a lot of conflict about money, and it can be like it's cultural, and there is that the phrase that people use, money is the root of all evil, which is actually incorrect. It's actually the love of money that is the root of all evil, is the original quote. But it's where there has been so much corruption over time. And because we have this corrupted, conflicted relationship with money in general, or there's the history of that, and it goes really deep in the U.S. at least. I would say most other Western countries, but particularly the U.S., we have a deep conflict, an obsession with money, and a disgust with money, and those are two sides of a very extreme spectrum, and that harmonious relationship with money is somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And so the nuance that you are speaking to is like the language around abundance, attracting abundance, speaking to that side, which is so beautiful in one sense, but it has kind of a shadow to it, I notice, where sometimes it's like before people, it's like this aspiration to have this abundant life before there has been real resolution with the money, the actual money piece. And abundance, to me, I have a lot of conflict with that word, just how it's used right now. I just have a lot of just the language around it feels it doesn't feel as honest as I want it to be sometimes. And I also personally, I really love using the term plenty instead, because it's like it's an acknowledgement um, of enough, of sufficiency, as Lynn Twist talks about in her book so beautifully. It's like there is abundance all around us, but how much abundance do we personally need? And just really recognizing, and that's kind of that harmonious center that each individual has to come to. What is plenty for me? My plenty is going to be very different from your plenty, but it's the stepping into that space of what is that plenty. Like what do I need, what is excessive, what does my life require, and how much can I share, with a very honest reflection where you're not jeopardizing your own well-being. And this is what comes up on the sort of noble poverty side, is like anything beyond the bare necessities is excessive, is I'm not worthy of that. It's this very constricted and restricted sense of what is possible for them personally. And so a lot of the time with my clients who are at that end of the spectrum, it's really uh, stretching the possibility, stretching what the potential is for that person, making sure that they are actually listening to what their needs are. So I'm not sure that I necessarily answer. I know it wasn't necessarily a question, but I'm just wondering if that.
You did talk about what I was aiming for, so thank you for that. And what I did here is what comes to my mind actually is that using the word affluence is kind of going back to the reaction, the shame around money is actually avoiding using the word wealth, avoiding the subject, um, which again, looking at time, and I have so many more questions for you. um, but let's try to wrap up this conversation. So, what would your advice be for people to get them started on this journey? Apparently, working with you would be an amazing start, and I'm not saying this to promote you, but because I genuinely believe that we well, most of us have this wound in us, this trauma in us, from one experience or repeated experiences, and avoiding it is not the answer is not the solution. So what would be a gentle way for our listeners to heal their relationship with money?
Yes. Well, I think I am, and I love that you use the word gentle, and that's inherent in my work, is for you, the listener, to step into this space, especially if it has been fraught. Either you notice, oh yeah, I really avoid the topic of money. I feel a little squirmy when it comes up. I don't like looking at my bank balance. Um, all the way to like, oh, I'm ready to start really tackling my investments and start building wealth, but I'm intimidated or I feel overwhelmed. So it's anywhere along the spectrum. Um, my highest recommendation is to really give yourself as much space as you need to be in your body and get support with that as you are stepping in to confront whatever small action it is, even if it's just a conversation, even if it's just listening to more in depth podcasts, whatever the small action is. You want to make sure that you are coupling it with sort of active gentleness, active compassion. So, um, giving yourself kind of a bridge. So maybe it's like, I'm going to open up my online bank account while I'm listening to really soothing music, or while I have my coziest sweater on. And you are sort of reminding yourself, like, I'm wearing my cozy sweater, I'm safe and I'm protected, as I step in to confront this thing that's really uncomfortable and really hard. And again, there can be a huge spectrum in that discomfort. But you want to be gentle with yourself and not create new patterns that make money a scary space or a threatening space. So that's a lot of my work with clients who have that shame trigger, or the trauma trigger, where you may go into fight or flight. You want to really be um, so so soft and gentle with yourself as you step into that space. So that's really always my highest advice, and it's so hard to remember in the moment, to give yourself that time, but it really can make all the difference. And it can be just taking a moment to ground and be with your breath for a few breath cycles before you do whatever it is that's hard. It can be calling a friend and saying, I'm about to do something kind of hard. Can you just stay on the phone with me for 5 minutes? While I look this up. They don't even know they have to know what you're doing, but it's just whatever is soothing to you that you can couple with that hard thing makes it easier, and it allows you to have less and less sort of physiologic resistance as you step into the harder things. And it makes it easier when you then raise your rates and have that first conversation with a new client, and you are stating that rate. You can drop back in. You don't have as much blocking you from engaging, because our relationship with money, it shows up in paying for your coffee in the morning, all the way to you know sending an invoice to a client. Our relationship with money shows up in all of those different places. So the more you can clear that pathway and have it be really gentle and supportive, the more you are training that in your brain to be something that is available to you and full of all kinds of possibilities.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And then a little bit to the side, but still connected to our conversation, a little bit on the side. As a bookworm, I really need to ask, you have a wonderful page with resources on your website, which I will share in the description of this episode. But if you could pick one book to support our conversation, or to help our readers expand on our conversation or the subject of money, which one would that be?
Oof, just one. That's that's so tricky. Well, I would say my favorite overall resource would be, especially for this conversation, I would really say, especially for sort of the entrepreneur, Overcoming Under Earning is a really powerful book for people who any of that part of the conversation resonated. That would be a really powerful book to start with.
And then, not necessarily on the subject of money, but which book are you reading these days? Are you
Oh,
reading a
I
book?
am. I'm always reading like 5 books at the same time.
I hear that so often.
um, so at the moment, I'm reading and loving Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. That's a really beautiful book about it's about activism, but it's sort of this beautiful exploration of how we can move forward um, in the world, and it's just very inspiring to me at the moment.
And then my really final question for you is, where can our listeners find you?
Well, you can go to my website tendedwealth.com, and I really am only on Instagram at Tended Wealth, and that's the best way to connect with me virtually in the social media world. So I would love to connect with anyone and support you in your own relationship with money and opening up wealth and the possibility of your future.
Hello again, it's me, Raina, the host of Hail the Queen. Before you go, three quick things. First, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I worked on, as much as I enjoyed creating it. Two, if you want to receive the behind the scenes article for each episode straight to your inbox, please sign up for the Hail the Queen newsletter. You can find the link to do that in the description of this episode, or you can visit our website, hailthequeen.me. And three, last but not least, please support Hail the Queen by either sharing this episode with a friend or subscribing to or following Hail the Queen on your favorite podcast provider. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being here. And until next time.